Margot stopped in front of the supermarket shelf, her shoulders hunched under the weight of worries. Her eyes, marked by the fatigue of sleepless nights and endless days, wandered through the rows of products. She held a pack of pasta, hesitating for a moment before placing it in the cart, which contained only a few essential items carefully chosen to fit the tight budget. Her 7-year-old son, Lucas, gently tugged at her sleeve. "Mum, can we get cookies?" he asked, his eyes shining with hope as he pointed to a colourful box on the shelf. Margot tried to smile, but the weight of reality left her expression laden with sadness. "Not today, my love. We have to save, remember?" Lucas frowned, clearly disappointed, but he didn't insist. He had already learned in his short life that many things were out of their reach. Margot felt a tightness in her heart. Every time she had to deny her son something so simple, the feeling of failure as a mother consumed her. She worked 2 jobs, yet the days seemed to be a constant struggle to survive, with bills piling up and dreams deferred. The cookies, a simple desire for many, seemed an unattainable extravagance in their routine of deprivation. They continued through the sections of the market, Margot carefully calculating the value of each item in her head. She knew exactly how much money she had in her wallet, the last few coins left after paying the overdue rent. When they reached the checkout, Margot placed the items on the conveyor belt with trembling hands. She knew exactly how much money she had in her wallet, every cent carefully counted before leaving home, and silently prayed that her bill wouldn't exceed this amount. The cashier, a young man with a bored expression, started scanning the products, and Margot kept her eyes fixed on the screen, her heart tightening with each number that appeared. Calculations were swirling in her head, but somehow something seemed wrong. When the total was announced, it felt as if the ground had vanished beneath her feet. It was more than she had. "It can't be," she murmured to herself, feeling the heat rise in her face. The people behind her in line began to fidget, letting out impatient sighs. Some exchanged frustrated glances. "Sorry," she said, her voice almost inaudible as she tried to keep her composure. "I think I'm going to have to return some things." With tearful eyes, Margot began to hurriedly sift through the bags, struggling to decide what to give up. Each item represented a necessity, something essential, but there was no choice. Meanwhile, Lucas, standing next to her, watched the scene silently, his childlike face filled with confusion. He had never seen his mother so troubled, and the restlessness of the line behind them made everything even more distressing. It was then that a calm and gentle voice sounded behind her, cutting through the hum of anxiety in her mind. "Don't worry, I'll pay for your purchase. Hey kid, how about a package of cookies for after dinner?" Margot turned slowly, surprised, and her eyes met the face of a middle-aged man. He had grey hair sprinkled at the temples and warm eyes behind glasses. It was a face marked by time, but it radiated kindness and serenity, a face Margot knew she would never forget. "Oh no, I couldn't accept," she replied, mortified, the words coming out almost as a whisper. The man was already handing his card to the cashier without hesitation. "Please, I insist. We all need a little help sometimes." Margot stood still, unable to articulate any other words. Tears began to well up in her eyes as she stammered, I don't know how to thank you. I promise I'll pay it back as soon as I can." He just shook his head gently, a compassionate smile still on his face. "There's no need. Just help someone else when you can, okay?" The kindness in his voice and the sincere look that reached her with such humanity left Margot deeply moved. Before she could say anything else, he calmly collected his purchases and left, disappearing through the automatic door. Margot remained there, astonished, with the image of that kind man etched forever in her memory, and a feeling of gratitude so intense it seemed larger than herself. In the days and weeks that followed, Margot couldn't stop thinking about the gesture of that kind stranger. Amidst her heavy routine and constant worries, that act seemed to have ignited a flame she thought was extinguished. The simple act of someone seeing her, of reaching out in a moment of need, had transformed what could have been just another episode of defeat into a sign of hope. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments there is goodness in the world, and it gave her the strength to carry on. Margot promised herself that she would repay that kindness someday, somehow. That promise became her guide in the toughest moments, a reminder that things could improve and that she could also be a source of light for others. Years passed, and life slowly began to change. Lucas grew up, becoming a studious and kind teenager, inspired by his mother's resilience. With effort and determination, Margot returned to studying, earning a diploma and eventually securing a job as a nursing assistant at a local hospital. Despite still facing challenges, she felt stronger, more capable. And as she cared for others, she often remembered that man at the supermarket. His seemingly small gesture had planted a seed that flourished in her life, bringing not only practical changes, but also renewing her faith in humanity and in herself. One autumn morning, Margot arrived at the hospital for her usual shift. The air was crisp, and the leaves on the trees were starting to change colour, painting the landscape in golden and red hues. She loved this time of year. It brought a sense of renewal and possibilities. "Good morning, Margot," greeted Sandra, the head nurse, as she entered the ward. "We have a new patient in room 205. Can you handle his admission?" Margot nodded, taking the clipboard with the patient's information. She lightly knocked on the door of room 205 before entering. "Good morning, Mr. Phillips. I'm Margot, the assistant who will be taking care of you today," she said with a warm smile. The man in the hospital bed turned toward her, and Margot felt her heart skip a beat. Even older and clearly debilitated, she recognized him instantly. He was the man who had paid for her groceries all those years ago. He smiled politely, without any sign of recognition in his eyes. "Hello, Miss Margot. You can call me Josh." Margot maintained her composure, her mind spinning with the incredible coincidence. She began to ask the routine questions, checking the elderly man's vital signs and noting down the necessary information. All the while her heart raced. In the days that followed, Margot dedicated herself especially to Josh's care. She discovered that he was 75 years old and was hospitalized for treating a complicated pneumonia that had severely debilitated him, along with some other issues neglected over the past few years. He had no close family, he was a widower, and his only child lived abroad. Josh was a kind and good-humoured patient, always with a kind word or a joke to brighten the atmosphere. Margot loved listening to him tell stories of his life. He had been a history teacher in a public school for over 40 years. "You know, Margot," he said one afternoon as she adjusted his pillows, "I've always believed that small acts of kindness can change the world. I never had much money, but whenever I could, I tried to help someone." Margot smiled, vividly remembering that day at the supermarket. "You must have made a big difference in people's lives, Josh." He shrugged modestly. "Who knows? We never really know the impact we have, but I like to think that maybe, in some small way, I helped someone have a better day." As the days passed, Margot felt an increasingly strong connection with Josh. She found herself eager to get to work, eager to see how he was doing. In her free time, she would bring books to read to him or simply sit by his bedside to chat. Josh often talked about his late wife, and whenever he mentioned her name, his eyes shone with a mixture of longing and affection. He described in vivid detail how they met in college, how she was full of life and passionate about helping others. "She was the one who taught me to be generous," he confessed one day, with a nostalgic smile. "Before I met her, I was a terribly stingy man, always worried about saving every penny and keeping everything for myself. She showed me that giving doesn't make us poorer. On the contrary, it enriches our soul." Maria listened attentively as he recounted how over the years his wife encouraged him to share what they had, even when it seemed like little. "At first it wasn't easy," he admitted with a thoughtful look. "I was afraid of not having enough for us. But she always said that when you give from the heart, somehow the universe or God finds a way to give back double." And you know, that's exactly what I experienced. The more I gave, the more life seemed to bless me. He sighed, his eyes lost in memories. Together, we built a life based on this. We raised our son with the same values and never stopped helping when we could. It was the best lesson she gave me, and it's something I try to honor every day. As he spoke, his gratitude for his wife was evident in every word, making it clear that his generosity, which had so often transformed lives, was a precious legacy from the one he loved so much. "You know, Margot," he said one day, his voice a little shaky, "sometimes I feel very lonely. After my partner passed away and my son moved, I feel invisible at times." Margot felt her heart tighten upon hearing those words. She knew that feeling well. Gently, she reached out and held his hand, offering comfort. "You are not alone, Josh. Here, there are many people who care about you." He smiled, grateful, yet still with a hint of melancholy. "You are all very kind, especially you, Margot. You know, you remind me a lot of my late wife when she was young. You have the same warm smile." Margot took a deep breath, hesitating for a moment before confessing. "You know, Josh, I have also felt invisible many times. There were moments in my life when I thought no one saw me, no one knew how much I was struggling to survive. But one day, someone looked at me, saw that I needed help, and did something that changed everything." Josh looked at her with curiosity and empathy. "What did they do for you?" Margot smiled, a smile full of emotion. "It was a trivial gesture for that person, but it made all the difference in my life. Because of that, I was able to move forward. Sometimes a small act of kindness can change everything." Josh nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "That's true, Margot. Small gestures can be more powerful than we imagine." Margot squeezed his hand more tightly, feeling the warmth of that connection that, although he did not know yet, had begun years ago on a day she would never forget. As the weeks went by, Josh's health gradually improved. He began taking short walks down the corridor, always with Margot by his side to support him. They talked about everything, about Josh's childhood in a small country town, about Margot's challenges as a single mother, about their dreams and fears. One afternoon, while helping Josh settle back into bed after a walk, Margot finally mustered the courage. "Josh," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "there's something I need to tell you." He looked at her, curious. "What is it, dear? Is everything okay?" Margot took a deep breath. "Do you remember once, many years ago, when you helped a woman at the supermarket? She didn't have enough money to pay for her groceries, and you covered the difference." Josh frowned, thoughtful. "You know, I don't remember specifically. I used to do that kind of thing often when I could. Why?" Margot felt the tears start to fall. "That woman was me, Josh. You changed my life that day." Josh stared at her, shocked. "You? But how?" Margot then told the whole story, how she was desperate that day, how his gesture had been a ray of hope in a very difficult moment. She spoke about how that act of kindness inspired her to keep fighting, to seek a better life for her and her son. "Your gesture gave me the strength to go on, Josh. It showed me that there was kindness in the world, that things could get better. And now, after all these years, I have the chance to give back, in some way." Josh listened, tears streaming down his wrinkled face. When Margot finished, he reached out his trembling hand and held hers. "Oh, Margot," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I had no idea. I never imagined that such a small gesture could have such an impact." Margot smiled through the tears. "It wasn't small for me, Josh. It was everything. And now, being able to take care of you, being able to give back in some way, it means the world to me." Josh squeezed her hand. "You've already given back 1,000 times, my dear. Your kindness, your care. You've brought light into my days here. I felt so alone, and you made me feel part of a family again." In that moment, something changed between them. It was as if an invisible circle had closed, a deep and meaningful connection sealed by years of kindness and gratitude. In the weeks that followed, the friendship between Margot and Josh blossomed even more. She introduced him to Lucas, now a 15-year-old, who was delighted with the stories of the old teacher. Josh, in turn, found a new reason to smile every day. When the day finally arrived for Josh to be discharged, Margot felt a mixture of joy and sadness. She was happy that he was well enough to go home, but the thought of not seeing him every day made her sad. "Don't think you're getting rid of me that easily," Josh joked as she helped him pack his things. "You and Lucas will have to visit me. After all, you're like family now, aren't you?" Margot smiled, feeling her heart fill with warmth. "Yes, we are family." As she watched Josh leave the hospital, supported by a cane but with a radiant smile on his face, Margot reflected on how life could be surprising. A simple act of kindness, years ago, had created a connection that spanned time, bringing light and love into both of their lives. She thought of all the times she had helped others over the years, inspired by Josh's gesture. How many other invisible connections had been created? How many lives had been touched? In that moment, Margot made a promise to herself. She would continue spreading seeds of kindness, continue helping others whenever she could. Because now she knew, with absolute certainty, that even the smallest act of kindness could create waves of change that would extend far beyond what could be imagined. As she walked back to the hospital ward, Margot felt a renewed sense of purpose. Every patient she cared for, every smile she offered, every kind word she said, all of this could be the beginning of something wonderful. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.